The Lost Letters of Paris. Amélie Thibault lived in a small but charming apartment overlooking the Seine in the heart of Paris. The city, with its romantic bridges, lively cafes, and bustling boulevards, had always been her greatest muse. An aspiring writer, Amélie spent her days in the cozy corner of her favorite cafe, pen in hand, capturing the fleeting moments of Parisian life that passed before her eyes. Her notebooks were filled with stories of love, loss, and the magic that seemed to linger in every cobblestone street. One warm summer afternoon, as the golden light of the setting sun bathed the city in a soft glow, Amélie decided to explore a lesser known corner of the Latin Quarter. This part of Paris was a labyrinth of narrow streets lined with ivy covered buildings and hidden courtyards. It was here that she stumbled upon a small, dusty bookstore tucked away between two larger shops. The store had no sign, and its windows were cluttered with stacks of old books that seemed to have been forgotten by time. Curiosity piqued. Amélie pushed open the creaking door and stepped inside. The air was thick with the smell of aged paper and leather bindings. The shelves, crowded with volumes of every kind, reached up to the ceiling. The shop was eerily quiet, save for the soft ticking of a clock somewhere in the back. There was no one else in sight. Amélie wandered through the narrow aisles, her fingers brushing against the spines of the books. She loved places like this, where each book held a story beyond the one written on its pages, a story of the people who had once owned it, read it, loved it. After a few minutes, she found herself drawn to a small, worn-out journal, hidden behind a row of heavier tomes. The journal was bound in faded brown leather, its cover scratched and stained with age. It looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. Carefully, Amélie opened the journal. Inside, she found pages filled with elegant handwriting, the ink slightly smudged in places. The words were in French, but the style was old-fashioned, like something from another era. As she read the first few lines, she realized that these were love letters, passionate, heartfelt, and intensely personal. They were all addressed to a woman named Élodie. Amélie's heart quickened as she flipped through the pages. Each letter was dated starting from 1940, just before the German occupation of Paris during World War II. The letters spoke of a deep, unrequited love, of longing, and the pain of separation. The writer, a man named Jacques, poured his soul into these letters, expressing feelings he could never bring himself to share in person. One letter, dated June 14, 1940, caught Amélie's eye. It read, "My dearest Élodie, as the war looms closer, my heart grows heavier with the thoughts of you. The city is changing, Élodie. The streets are filled with fear, and our once vibrant Paris feels like a shadow of itself. I see you every day, yet I cannot tell you what is in my heart. To do so would put you in danger, and that is something I cannot bear. But I write these words, knowing they may never reach you, hoping that someday you might know how deeply I have loved you. Yours always, Jacques." Amélie felt a shiver run down her spine. The letter ended abruptly, and the following pages were blank. She wondered why the letters had never been sent and what had become of Jacques and Élodie. The mystery captivated her, and she knew she had to uncover the truth. Taking the journal with her, Amélie hurried to the counter where a kindly old man, the shop's owner, sat reading a book. "Excuse me," she said, holding up the journal. "I found this in the back. Do you know anything about it?" The old man peered over his glasses at the journal, a look of recognition crossing his face. "Ah, that old thing," he murmured. "It's been here for as long as I can remember. No one's ever asked about it before." "Do you know who wrote these letters?" Amélie asked. He shook his head. "I'm afraid I don't. The journal was part of a collection of books I acquired many years ago. The previous owner, an elderly woman, had passed away, and her family sold off her belongings. That journal was among them." Amélie thanked the man and purchased the journal, her mind racing with possibilities. Who was Élodie? What had happened to Jacques? And why had these letters been forgotten? Over the next few days, Amélie threw herself into researching the history of the journal. She visited the National Archives, combed through old newspapers, and even sought out historians who specialized in World War II-era Paris. But information about Jacques and Élodie was scarce. It was as if they had been lost to history. Then one day, while reading through a list of names of French resistance fighters, Amélie came across a mention of a man named Jacques Dubois. The name matched the signature in the journal, and further research revealed that Jacques had been a member of the French resistance, operating in Paris during the war. He had been involved in several key operations, but had vanished in 1943, leaving no trace behind. Amélie was certain this was the Jacques who had written the letters. But what about Élodie? There was no record of her in any of the archives. It was as if she had never existed. Undeterred, Amélie decided to track down the bookstore owner's lead, the elderly woman who had originally owned the journal. After days of searching, she finally found a possible address in an old directory. It led her to a quiet neighborhood near Montmartre, where the houses were old and steeped in history. She arrived at a modest stone house, its front door painted a soft shade of blue. Nervously, she knocked. An elderly woman with silver hair and a gentle face answered the door. She looked at Amélie with curiosity. "May I help you?" she asked in a soft voice. Amélie introduced herself and explained her quest, showing the woman the journal. The woman's eyes widened in recognition as she reached out to take the journal from Amélie's hands. "I thought I'd lost this forever," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "You must be Élodie," Amélie said, her heart pounding. The woman nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "Yes, I am Élodie, and these letters, they were written by Jacques, the man I loved but could never be with." Élodie invited Amélie inside, and they sat together in her cozy living room, surrounded by mementos of a life lived in the shadow of a great love. Élodie opened the journal, her hands trembling slightly as she turned the pages. "Jacques was my neighbor," she began, her voice filled with nostalgia. "We grew up together in this very neighborhood. He was always so serious, so focused on his studies, while I was more carefree. We didn't realize we were in love until the war broke out." She paused, her eyes distant as she recalled the past. When the Germans occupied Paris, everything changed. Jacques joined the resistance, and he became a different man, driven, secretive. He never spoke of his work, never wanted to put me in danger. But I knew he was risking his life every day. Élodie's voice broke as she continued. "He never told me how he felt, but I could see it in his eyes. There were times when I wanted to ask him, to make him admit what we both knew. But I was too afraid that if I did, he would leave me for good." Amélie listened intently, her heart aching for the woman who had lived with such unresolved emotions for so long. "What happened to Jacques?" she asked gently. Élodie shook her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. "He disappeared in 1943. One day he was there, and the next he was gone. I never knew what happened to him. The war ended, but I never heard from him again. I searched, but it was as if he had vanished into thin air." Amélie placed a comforting hand on Élodie's arm. "These letters," she said softly, "are proof of how much he loved you. Even if he never said the words, he wrote them down. He wanted you to know, even if it was too dangerous to tell you in person." Élodie nodded, her tears flowing freely now. "I always hoped he felt the same way, but after he disappeared, I had to move on. I married, had children, but I never forgot Jacques. He was my first love, and in many ways, my greatest love." Amélie felt a deep sense of responsibility to share Élodie's story with the world. She asked for Élodie's permission to write a book based on the letters and the story of her love with Jacques. Élodie agreed, feeling that perhaps, through Amélie's words, Jacques' memory would live on. Over the next year, Amélie worked tirelessly on the novel. She poured all of her passion and creativity into telling the story of Élodie and Jacques, weaving together the fragments of their lives into a narrative that was both heartbreaking and beautiful. The book, titled The Lost Letters of Paris, became a bestseller, touching the hearts of